WFYI podcasts are brought to you by Visit Bloomington. With over 350 restaurants to choose from, Bloomington, Indiana is truly a food lover's paradise. Go to visitbloomington.com to discover what suits your taste.
This is WFYI News Now. It's February 26th, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, Newfields searches for a CEO. The approach behind a crime reduction initiative offered by the county. A bill that would have improved disputes around special education failed at the Statehouse. And an Indiana couple who lost custody of their transgender teen is hoping to convince the U.S. Supreme Court to take their case.
They believe that children should be raised based on their sex at birth, and using pronouns and names that are opposite to their sex at birth is immoral and harmful.
Those stories coming up. But first, a guilty verdict came Friday for a man charged with fatally shooting Indianapolis police officer Breann Leath in 2020. Eric Weddle reports the man was also found by the court to be mentally ill.
31-year-old Elias Dorsey was convicted of killing IMPD officer Breann Leath while she responded to a domestic violence call. The jury deliberated for 15 hours over 2 days. The jury also found Dorsey to be mentally ill in the attempted murder of 3 other police officers and the attempted murder and criminal confinement of Dorsey's girlfriend at the time. Dorsey's defense attorneys argued he has psychotic disorders and woke up with delusions the day of the shooting. Now, Dorsey faces decades in prison. He will be sentenced in an upcoming hearing. I'm Eric Weddle.
For more on this story, you can visit WFYI.org/news. The search for a new leader of Newfields was announced last week. The job posting comes 3 months after former president and CEO Colette Burnett announced her unexpected departure, less than 2 years after she was hired to lead the art museum. A number of board members resigned after Burnett left. Neither Newfields nor Burnett provided a reason for her departure, though many called for more information. The museum enlisted a private search company to facilitate the national search. And a program that teaches groups how to create spaces that promote safety is open to residents. Jill Sheridan reports on the crime reduction initiative offered by the Marion County Prosecutor's Office.
Crime prevention through environmental design is an initiative that improves community security using solutions including landscaping, lighting, and beautification. Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears says free training on the approach is being offered to community groups.
Have a conversation about what maybe they could do differently or better. And it really just builds that level of trust of, hey, we're all trying to work together to make sure that we're protecting ourselves, but also having communication about what's going on.
Groups should contact the prosecutor's office to schedule a presentation. I'm Jill Sheridan.
Legislation that would change the way schools and families settle conflicts over special education services failed to advance in the Indiana Statehouse. Lee Gaines reports the proposal faced opposition from multiple organizations that represent school boards, administrators, and teachers.
The bill would, under certain circumstances, require school districts involved in due process cases prove they followed special education law, rather than make parents prove they didn't. The bill also included a provision that would prevent schools from requiring parents sign confidentiality agreements, or NDAs, as part of special education settlements. Both measures were stripped from House Bill 1380 during a Senate committee hearing. School administrators opposed to the legislation say it would lead to increased litigation, while advocates for children with disabilities say the changes would help even out a power imbalance between families and schools. I'm Lee Gaines.
And for our final story today, Indiana passed controversial legislation restricting transgender youth's access to health care in 2023. The Statehouse also considered a failed bill last year. That bill would have prevented courts from allowing the Indiana Department of Child Services to remove children from homes that do not support their gender identity or access to gender-affirming care. At the heart of the bill was a court case between DCS and the parents of a transgender child named AC in court records. The parents are now hoping to convince the U.S. Supreme Court to take their case after lower courts sided with DCS. WFYI's Zach Cassel sat down with IndyStar investigative reporter Kristine Phillips, who has been watching the case to learn more.
Thanks for being with us, Kristine.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us about the case.
The case is about this couple from Anderson, Indiana. Name is Mary and Jeremy Cox. They are deeply religious and devout Christians, and they believe that children should be raised based on their sex at birth and using pronouns and names that are opposite to their sex at birth is immoral and harmful. This all kind of started in 2019 when their teenage child came out to them and said that she identifies as a girl. Shortly after that, DCS received a report alleging that there were some abuse regarding AC's gender identity. So in 2021, the Coxes lost custody of AC. DCS conducted an investigation. A court in Madison County ruled that AC should be taken out of the home and into the custody of DCS. What the court said was that AC had developed a severe eating disorder that was tied to the conflict with her parents. The Coxes lost custody of AC back in 2021. She was 16 years old. The Coxes then appealed to the Indiana Court of Appeals. What the court ruled is that the parents' rights were not violated. At the heart of the Coxes' argument is that they have every right as parents to raise their child however they see fit, to express their religious views, and that's their constitutional right as parents. They also argue that these allegations of abuse that came out earlier were dismissed and were never unsubstantiated. The Court of Appeals ruled that their rights were not violated. One powerful quote from the Court of Appeals ruling is that, yes, parents have the right to exercise their religious beliefs, but they don't have the right to exercise them in a way that would harm their child. In the State Appeals Court, the Coxes lost. They tried to get the Indiana Supreme Court to take their case, but they also lost.
What are some of the arguments that DCS is making in the case?
DCS is represented by the Indiana Attorney General's office, and they made a far less controversial argument. The reason that AC was taken away from the Coxes was not because of this conflict over gender identity and religious beliefs. Rather, it was because of this severe eating disorder that AC had developed because of those conflict with those parents. The argument is that this eating disorder will get worse if she was placed back in the custody of her parents. The other thing they're arguing is that the case is now moot. It's not relevant anymore because AC, when this all started, was 16 years old. That was in 2021. Now she's an adult, and the custody case is actually closed. What the Coxes are saying is that even if their daughter is now an adult, this case could have wide ramifications to religious parents across the country.
What's at stake for transgender youth?
It's in conflict with the rights of transgender youths, whether they can express themselves, whether they can use the right pronouns and names according to their gender identity. The Indiana legislature has bills that goes after gender-affirming care that would require teachers to notify parents about students who want to be referred to by a different name or a different pronoun. So it touches on a lot of the issues of transgender rights.
Where does the case stand now, and what's next?
The Indiana Attorney General's office filed a brief in the Supreme Court earlier this month, and then shortly after that, the Coxes filed another brief. So right now, we're just waiting for the Supreme Court to decide whether or not to take the case. The Supreme Court gets about 10,000 of these petitions every year, and they take a very small fraction of that, less than 1%.
Thank you so much, Kristine.
That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by the following people who live in your community: Darian Benson, Drew Daudelin, Kendall Antron, who composed the music for this podcast, and me, Abriana Herron. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. If you liked today's episode, remember to subscribe and share, and follow WFYI on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.